I'm the National Manager of the team here at Vision Australia. And today we've got a panel of experts with us to answer your questions. So, like I say, it's the end of 2020, nearly ahead of us, and what a strange year it's been. One thing that COVID has certainly shown us is the importance of ensuring that our digital communications and services are accessible to everyone, as this has become the prominent form of way that we're communicating either with our clients or customers. So it's really great that we've had so many questions coming to us today from 11 countries in total are present in this webinar. We've had an abundance of questions, like I say, so apologies from the outset if we don't get a chance to cover yours, and we try to amalgamate a few of them together. Just a couple of housekeeping things. If you could all please keep yourselves on mute and you can have your videos turned off. We will just have the panel with their videos and microphones on. There is a chat facility and we'll come to this a couple of times during the session to pull out some questions from there. The session has been recorded today as well, and it will be available on our YouTube channel as the previous webinars are all available as well. So please feel free to share that or revisit it afterwards. So to our panel, we've got some of our key members from the Digital Access team. We've got Bo, Matt, we've got Jonathan, Deb, Josh, who are all joining us today to answer your questions around inclusive design and technical accessibility, etc. We've also got Bruce Maguire, who is a lead policy advisor at Vision Australia. And we've got David Woodbridge, whose title actually appeared to be, I checked before, as AT advisor, but that man is so much more than just an AT advisor. We've also got Alex Bay joining us hopefully shortly as well. Alex works across Digital Access and TaggedPDF, so he can certainly answer some of your document-related questions. So without further ado, we will crack on. So the first question that we've got here, what are the legal requirements for digital access in Australia? Compliance obligations for local government, and do we have standards to adhere to in Australia or only best practice? So that question there, I'll start with this one. We do have standards to adhere to in Australia. The current standard is WCAG 2.0, but we are hoping for a move to WCAG 2.1 shortly. Now, I'm going to attempt to share my screen. Hopefully this will work. Okay. Can someone just let me know if they can see that? Yep. Okay. So on your screen now, this is a page from the South Australian Government's online accessibility toolkit. Great resource to go to for lots of information around accessibility. But with that first question there around legal requirements and obligations for local government, they actually provide a direct link here to all of the different states and territories and their individual policies. So like I say, great resource there. When we actually go to the Australian government, at the moment, we can see down in the digital service standard that the reference is for WCAG 2.0 at the moment, but they are encouraging, strongly encouraging that you meet WCAG 2.1 to AA. Now then, the new EN 301549 standard from Standards Australia has just been released, and that references WCAG 2.1 AA. So we anticipate come the new year that the Australian Human Rights Commission and federal government and states to follow as well will move to the 2.1 WCAG standard. Bruce, have you got anything else you'd like to share on that point?
Thanks, Neil. Yeah, look, it is true that we have, these standards. The extent to which they are legally binding, however, is I guess open for discussion. In Australia, the disability discrimination framework that we operate under is overseen by the Disability Discrimination Act, which is a piece of Commonwealth legislation. Australia being having a Commonwealth government and then sort of 8 state and territory sort of governments, and the DDA covers the whole of Australia, and it makes it unlawful to discriminate against people with a disability in certain key areas of public life. Not all areas of public life, just certain key ones. And one of those areas is the provision of goods, services and facilities, not the goods, services and facilities themselves, but the provision of them. And it's generally held that websites and more recently apps are ways of providing goods and services. And so they come within the scope of the Disability Discrimination Act. However, the DDA doesn't require that particular standards, such as WCAG 2.1, are followed. Rather, the DDA says that it's unlawful to discriminate, and discriminate basically comes down to less favourable treatment. So if I believe I'm being treated less favourably because I can't use a website or can't use an app, then I can lodge a complaint with the Australian Human Rights Commission, and the Commission will attempt to reach a voluntary conciliated settlement of that complaint. If that doesn't work, then I have the option of taking my complaint to the federal court, which is the body that has the power to make legally binding, legally enforceable decisions. Again, the DDA doesn't specify that websites and apps have to comply with a particular standard. There are some standards that have been developed under the Disability Discrimination Act, and they cover areas. At the moment, those standards cover education, access to buildings, and accessible public transport. There is in theory, we could have a standard that covered the provision of goods, services and facilities, but there really hasn't been any work done on that standard. So at the moment, from a legal perspective, whilst these standards do exist and government at various levels are encouraged to comply with them, how much legal force they would have if in the event of a complaint that went to the federal court is kind of unclear. Although I always say, look, if a website complies with WCAG, if an app complies with WCAG, then there is much less likelihood that someone will lodge a disability discrimination complaint. And similarly, if a website doesn't comply with WCAG, or if an app doesn't comply, then they're increasing the risk that there'll be a disability discrimination complaint, because the more an app or website doesn't comply with a standard, then the more likely it is that there'll be some people who won't be able to access certain aspects of it, or that there'll be certain aspects of the website or app that none of us will be able to access.
Thank you, Bruce. And look, I think that just reinforces what Digital Access believe, as do most of others working in the same space as us, that, the guidelines are one thing, WCAG is one aspect of this, and it's important, but really involving end users and testing with end users, that is what this is all about. It's about making a difference to people, not just around legal standards. And testing with end users is really the gold standard. And that's where complaints come from, as Bruce said there, frustration, not being able to access services, not because something maybe isn't strictly WCAG compliant. That's just part of the journey to get us to that end. So thank you, Bruce. Next question. Can screen readers read content within an iframe that is embedded on a web page? Oh.
Well, simple answer is it can and will read the content of an iframe. The other thing to note is that it often won't actually mention that it's gone into iframe content. So a screen reader user may not know at all that they're in separate content in an iframe, which could be a completely different thing, like a YouTube video or a Google map. And I can imagine that that's a really useful piece of information. If you're a screen reader user and you've used Google Maps before, then already you've gone into Google Map content, how to use it, or maybe to avoid it completely because it's going to be a huge pain. So what we normally do is you add a title attribute to the iframe to describe what that content is, and that can help inform screen reader users of what they're actually entering.
Perfect. Guys on the panel, if anyone's got any other contributions they want to add it to anything at any time, please feel free to jump in.
Yeah, I'll add to that. Excuse me. Pretty much when you're putting in your title, you can be very generic. It can just be YouTube video player. You don't need to go into the actual title of the video because that will be announced afterwards. You just need to provide general of what this content contains.
Perfect. Thank you, guys. Hopefully that answered your question, whoever sent that one in. Next one, and actually, Matt, this is another one for you, so you can stay there unmuted. Can we recommend any captioning transcribing tools?
So we normally use Otter AI for our webinars. This isn't a perfect solution. Of course, it's an automated captioning tool. And the big problem with it is that it does open up in a separate window. So it's best if someone has dual screens available to them. But as far as, as a captioning tool, Otter AI is good for webinars. For just regular videos, I recommend Amara, which is a free tool available online that can caption any video. You just give it a video file, and using the tool online, you can get captions for your video. Otherwise, even the YouTube one isn't that bad. You know, YouTube allows you to go and edit captions as well. So that's another thing you can try out.
So the key thing as well is you need to edit them. Don't go with automated, yeah?
Yeah, if it's a pre-recorded video, you really got to go in there and edit those captions, because especially with an Australian accent, or if there's any background noise in the video, it tends to fall apart.
Actually, Matt and Neil, could you use those same captioning tools to also provide an actual transcription of a video or an audio podcast or radio program? So I'm thinking that would sort of kill two birds with one stone. You could have both a captioning one, and then you could use that same content to cut and paste into a description of a podcast or radio show.
Yeah, absolutely. It could serve two purposes as a transcript for audio only content. For a video, it's not a full solution because in the video, there may be visual only content in the video. Right. So you may need to add that into your transcript.
Cool. Thank you, guys. Clarification about why not to having links opening in new windows. Bo, would you like to take this one?
I would. I like this one because I have a developer background and this came up quite a bit. I used to work for an agency where the managing director, who wasn't like day-to-day involved in what we were doing, but whenever we were like testing a site we were about to push live, he'd come over if he found an external link that was going to open in, that wasn't going to open in a new window, and he'd be very upset. And that's the main thing he was getting upset about, of all things, was it should open in a new window. So that's the reason why, was because our clients would want the new window to open. So anyone going to an external site, when they're finished, they will close that window and be back on the client website again. So that aside, from a usability point of view, I've always disliked it. I've never wanted to do that, because users already have the option to open a new tab or window very easily if they want to. You hold the control button, or at least in my keyboard, it's the control button, and click or press enter, and that will open the page in a new tab or window. So when users already have the option to choose to do it, I see no reason to force it. And in general, I think that giving users options is going to be the best approach. If you do have to force a new window to open, then you should inform the users that that's going to happen. Make sure that it says on the link that it's going to open in a new window. You can use an image or icon that's often used to show that a link's going to open in a new window, but that should also have alternative text on it for screen reader users to make sure everyone is being informed that that's going to happen.
Thanks, Bo. Josh, here's one for you. It's a very short question, so take it as you wish. Color palettes. As our design expert, Josh, is there anything that you can give us around color palettes?
Yeah, color palettes, it's hard to know, I guess, answer that without context. So there are some general sort of guidance around that. You've got the WCAG standards. I think Apple Human Interface Guidelines and Android guidelines talk about it as well. And that is sort of color contrast ratios, which tend to be, around how high the contrast is of, say, text against a background color, or it could be icons against a background color, or it could even be, checking the color contrast between two colors that are used within a chart. So that's one thing to consider with color palettes that's probably fairly well known on accessibility circles. The other part is obviously designing for your intended audience. So say if you knew, for example, that the people visiting your website or your app or your brand, say had post-traumatic stress disorder or anxiety or something like that, then you probably want to choose colors that are quite calming. They tend to be sort of greens and purples and blues. So that you might want to focus on that a little bit. And one other consideration is with the contrast rules, you can't always just take them sort of like the higher the contrast, the better as a rule. For some people, low vision, the higher the contrast, let's say pure white on pure black background would be the best solution. But for some other people, that becomes really, really hard to read because it is so high contrast, it's hard on the eyes. And that can impact everyone from people with ADHD, who could be easily distracted. It can impact even just people with migraines. So it's kind of, you probably don't want to go for pure white text and a pure black background. You probably want to go for like a really light gray tint or something like that on a pure black background. And similar with bright colors. So you can pick a dark bright color. It can meet the contrast requirements. So it could be really bright blue, for example. But with a white paragraph of text on top of it, it becomes really, really hard to read as well. So you kind of got to factor that in too. So I guess they're the three main things I tend to consider when it comes to color palettes. Beyond that, it's obviously colors are a very deep topic, and choosing colors that represent something. You could talk about it for hours. And I guess one of the considerations, not really choosing a color palette, but you want to make sure that you're not communicating using just color alone. So usually there'll be some other visual means or something that's read out by the screen reader that can also communicate what that color is saying. So for example, don't just use the color red to indicate the meaning of something.
I'm so glad you mentioned that, Josh.
Yeah, use an icon or which obviously would have a text alternative, or couldn't just be text itself. But yeah, some other kind of visual means as well.
Yeah, can I just add to that? Because the main one that I come across all the time is when you're filling out online form and say you hit the submit button, it says, "I'm sorry, you haven't filled out all the forms. Please fill out the fields marked in red." And you think, well, that's fantastic. I'll just have to go and find somebody with a bit of vision to let me know what fields are red. So that's, again, what Josh is talking about. Make sure there's also an alternative when you're referencing a color in particular, that there's an alternative to it. Otherwise, like Bruce was saying, you'll get people complaining about the usability of your web page or app because it's become unusable.
Thank you. Thank you both. David, while I've got you there, we've got a question here, which is kind of in two parts. I'm reducing it down, or two questions, should I say. One is around digital accessibility in the classroom, and the other one is how to assist people in the workplace. So from a technologies perspective, what do you recommend, or what are you seeing coming through to assist students and staff, let's say, with a vision impairment?
Look, it's actually really varied these days. So I'm seeing a huge jump, at least as far as I know with my own boys, a huge increase in Google Classroom. That's really quite popular, which does work with screen readers, particularly JAWS for Windows, job access with speech. My high school that my boys go to started using Zoom quite a lot this year. And of course, that's completely fully compatible whether you're using it on a mobile or a desktop platform. From a sort of a Braille literacy point of view this year, there was this new device that came out called the Canute, which is actually C-A-N-U-T-E, Canute 360. And that's a 360 cell, 9-line by 40 Braille display. Now, the reason why that's important is in particularly for STEM, so science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, because if you're reading a mathematical equation, if you're doing programming, if you're reading log charts, all that sort of tabular type information, because you've literally got a 9-line by 40 cell Braille display, then each table, column / row, it relates to each other. And the other offshoot of that multi-line Braille display is one that's been lacking for a long time, and that is the teaching of Braille music, particularly to blind students that can read Braille. So again, you have both the treble and the bass clef on each line, one above each other, And again, you've got that direct relationship between the two bars, particularly piano, say for the bottom and the left hand, the bottom and the right hand up the top. So that's all incredibly important. The other thing I've noticed too, there's a lot of stuff coming out on note takers. So there's been a few note takers coming out this year. One that just got available in Australia as of last week is the Mantis Q40. So that's a QWERTY keyboard and a 40-cell braille display that's actually very, very handy. You've also got wearable devices now, and I know in classrooms it can get a bit challenging with people looking at the blackboard or a whiteboard. So besides handheld, manual and electronic portable video magnifiers, you can also get wearable devices now. And the two ones that I'm mainly thinking about are the Orcam, which is the wearable device that not only reads print from afar for signage and that sort of stuff, but you can also access information on a computer screen, a whiteboard. I don't know how much we do on a blackboard with the good old chalk, but definitely on a whiteboard. And then, of course, you've got the other device, which is called the Iris Vision. And that's using basically a virtual magnifier. So you've got this sort of gaming headset linked up to a Samsung phone, which is basically built into the goggle of the glasses. And then that's basically completes the Iris Vision. There's a software app running on the Samsung phone. You're literally looking through the Samsung phone into near or far distance viewing. And the nice thing about that, like quite a few portable video magnifiers, you can take snapshots. So if the teacher's just written up an equation on the board and you're sitting there trying to read it, then you can certainly take a snapshot of the actual information on the board and then take it down at your own leisure. And of course, all the accessibility across Windows, Mac, Android, and iOS is always improving all the time. So I just finished looking back at a decade, and this is going to be a really weird saying, but this is a really good time to be vision impaired in some ways, because all the technology, I think from 2010, I would say has improved by at least 50%.
That's excellent. I mean, that's a real movement, and that's a real statement of commitment as well from a lot of the big vendors out there to move with that. Thanks, David. Yep. Alex, I've got one here for you, my friend. Do I really need to adjust the tag order in PDFs?
Yes. Next question.
Next question. That's fine, Alex. You don't need to debate on that anymore. I've got another one we can move straight on to. Footnotes in Word docs. Are these accessible to screen readers? And how about footnotes applied in InDesign source files exported to Acrobat PDF?
Okay. Sure. So footnotes are keyboard accessible and are able to be accessed using JAWS. So the ones in Word are really good. It obviously links straight to it and then comes back. When you are accessing them from InDesign, again, they definitely are, but you need to be careful when you do the automatic export from InDesign and also from Word when you go to PDF. So for both of them, by default, it will only link the first time that you have a footnote. So if you've got multiple footnotes on the same page, the default link will take you down to the footnotes at the bottom of the page and then read all of the footnotes. And then it won't take you there again because you can only have that content tagged once in the chain. So they can be made screen reader accessible, but from Word or from InDesign, you will need to go and manually separate if there are multiple footnotes on the one page so that each footnote is linking in the body copy down to the correct one and then moves back on to the rest of the content.
Perfect. Thank you, Alex. Next one. What is the latest major update in accessibility in 2021 that we should be aware of? So WCAG 2.1 that I mentioned earlier on, really would expect that to become the standard, but WCAG 2.2, we're hoping for the final, probably about middle of next year. So it's kind of summertime in Northern Europe. is what they're stating for that. We've also got the EN 301549 standard that I mentioned. Does anybody on the panel have anything else that they think all of the viewers here or listeners here should be aware of? Another major update coming through next year for accessibility. No, that's great. No.
Actually, hang on. One thing I want to point out too, there is a bit of a trend now particularly with voice technology, and this should be coming out next year, I hope, is the fact that all the major manufacturers of smart speakers, so basically Apple, Amazon, and Google, are trying to do a few things. And the first one is trying to make the voice recognition cope with people that either have a very thick accent or cannot speak clearly for one reason or another. So that's one thing that's going to be implemented hopefully more next year. And the thing that Amazon has just introduced about a week ago in the United States, and I hope it's deployed everywhere in the world, is that up until now, Amazon smart speakers are the only speakers that you cannot type to on your smartphone. So with the Siri and the Google Assistant, you can type to those as well as speak. Whereas Amazon Echo, Alexa has been left out in the cold. So that's now coming online now. So that's actually a really good thing to look forward to. And another interesting bit, and next year, and this is more about the gaming side of technology, is that Sony's just released the PS5. Now, where that comes into its own now is not only do we push accessibility about web design and app design, but we also push accessibility about game design. And for the first time outside of the United States, the PS5 will now be fully accessible, particularly for a blind person using a screen reader. Up until this point, you had to be in the US to use the text-to-speech, but now you don't. So with games like Last of Us 2 from Naughty Dog, that's an accessible game, you've now got the ability to be able to actually also access the console on the PS5, not the PS4, only the PS5. So from a game point of view, it's absolutely brilliant. And from a parental point of view, like the Xbox with the built-in screen reader narrator from Microsoft, you'll have the same level of access now on the Sony PlayStation. So I'm looking forward to that being deployed more and more around the world next year.
That's great. Thank you, David. And I know that, to help people with speech impediments, let's say, there's been third-party apps. So it's great that all of the main providers now are providing greater support for people with speech. That's excellent.
I'll just add to that as well. I think haptic feedback it's obviously still fairly minimal in its use, but I want to say haptic feedback, the way phones vibrate, or a concept of multi-sensory design, where you're talking about touch, sight, like seeing the screen, and hearing as well through auditory means. That's starting to really gain traction as well. So I know Visa and MasterCard, for example, have thrown loads of money into this multi-sensory design space. And I wouldn't be surprised, if haptic feedback or the way the phone vibrates starts to grow, or the watch or whatever it is, starts to grow a little bit as well in the way that's used. I don't know if you know anything about David, but Apple released a few weeks ago, I think the phone can vibrate if you're 1.5 meters, standing 1.5 meters away from somebody as a new setting. I don't know if you've heard about that one.
Yeah, so that's the LiDAR. So that comes off the same technology that's used in self-driving cars. So if you've got an iPhone 12 Pro or Max, or you've got an iPhone 11 Pro and greater, then you go into settings, people recognition, turn on people detection, and then when you run the magnifier app, it'll tell you how somebody is away from you. So whether it's 1.5 meters, 3 meters, and if you've got low vision, if you've got about 4 or 5 people in front of you, you can see a dot on the person that's closest to you. So from a COVID social distancing point of view, that's actually really interesting. And then, of course, Apple, by default, is doing a lot of work on photography, particularly for blind and low vision. So at the moment, the camera by itself in the iPhone will recognize objects as well as people and their faces. Now you've got in combination with the LiDAR technology, for telling how far people are away from you. So who knows what's going to come in 2021. I can imagine a combination of object recognition, virtual reality, augmented reality, all coming together. So who knows what we're going to have next. But that's what I'm really looking forward to next year, is the cross deployment of all the different virtual realities coming in and giving really good access to somebody who's blind or low vision.
That's great. Look, thank you, guys. I'm going to move on because we could probably spend the whole hour just talking about any one of these questions, apart from tagging in PDF. Deb, have we got any questions on the chat? Do you want to pass us one of them that's come through, please?
Okay, so how do screen readers read different types of punctuation? Are there punctuation marks that are better to use or better to avoid?
Who'd
I
like
can
to
answer that. I'll answer that one. That's easy. So basically, you can use any punctuation mark your heart desires. So because what people do with screen readers across desktop and mobile platforms is you set your punctuation level. And usually the traditional one is no punctuation, some punctuation, most punctuation, or when you're proofreading, all punctuation. So every single punctuation mark gets announced. So no, there's no particular setting for any punctuation. It's up to the person using the screen reader to decide what punctuation level they'd like to access.
Perfect. Thank you, David. Okay, Bruce, I've got one for you here. It might seem like it should be going to Alex, but I'm going to send this one to you. Is a well-structured Word doc still the best option after HTML web pages for accessibility? Is it better to avoid using PDFs?
I'll begin. Thanks, Neil. I'll begin answering that by saying there's two things. There's two things that drive me bananas. One is having to figure out which of the errors that I've made when filling in forms are in red, and the other thing is trying to read footnotes in PDF files. I get a lot of, in my work, I get a lot of fairly complex documents, and many of them have got 5-6 footnotes per page. And trying to read those in tagged PDF files is, without disrupting the flow of the reading, is very challenging. I think that while the accessibility of PDF files has certainly improved since tagging has been introduced, there are still many situations where structured Word files are better. I'm thinking, for example, of where you want to produce Braille, and you cannot produce Braille, hard copy Braille, directly from a PDF file. You've got to sort of do things to it, export it into formats, and hope that the structure is retained, and then import that exported format into a Braille translation software. The Braille note takers, at least the ones that I'm familiar with, don't support tagging features. So when you open a PDF file on one of the Braille note takers, it's as if it's untagged, even if it's tagged. So if you want to read a tagged PDF file on a Braille note taker, then it's not going to work. Now you can say, well, that's not the fault of the standard, and it's not the fault of the tagged PDF. It's the fault of the Braille note taker manufacturers and the Braille translation software developers who haven't incorporated these standards into their software. And that might be true, but that's what we've got to deal with. The other thing, because certainly in my work, I often want to make notes in documents that I'm reading, and it's much more straightforward to do that in a Word document. Having said that, I find that if there are, particularly if a document is not terribly complex, if there are if there are simple tables, if there are not a plethora of footnotes, I often choose the tagged PDF. If I know there's going to be a tagged PDF version, I will often choose that over the Word version. I think because it's often just more compact to sort of to read and navigate through. Using a Braille display, one of the things that I do find with PDF files is that you don't get blank lines between paragraphs as you can in a Word file. So just sort of panning down with the Braille display, it's not as easy to kind of just skim from paragraph to paragraph with PDF files. The other thing about tagged PDF files is that there are many, like not all tagged PDF files are equal, I found anyway, and I'd be interested in Alex's comments on this, because one of the things I found is that you can get two tagged PDF files, and one of them has no structure in it at all, no headings, no paragraphs, and the other one has lots of structure. They both appear to Adobe as tagged PDF files, so you don't get the dialog box about inferring the reading order and all those sorts of things. So I think a lot depends on the knowledge and the expertise of the people producing tagged PDF files. And one of the things that I think happens particularly in governments is that they know that it's best to produce a tagged PDF file, so they sort of maybe just take a Word document that they haven't very well structured and exported it, and select the option to export to tagged PDF, and they assume that then produces a well structured tagged sort of PDF file, but that's not the case. So I suppose it's kind of to summarize, I think that while the accessibility of PDF files has improved, and while it's certainly true that a well put together tagged PDF file is better than an untagged PDF file, I still think in terms of universal accessibility, a well structured Word file is best.
Thank you, Bruce. Look, certainly agree with you as well on the fact that not all tagged PDF files are equal. And the approach that people apply to tagging as well isn't quite the same, and there's a lot of confusion maybe around that, and that comes through in the training we do. Alex?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think in terms of the Adobe checker, the way that I sort of explain it often when we're running the training is that the Adobe checker, checking accessibility is a lot like a relief teacher asking whether everyone's done their homework. So it'll say, like, is there stuff there? Are there tags? It doesn't necessarily check whether those tags are right if you've put the amount of effort in that you need to do. They're just seeing, is there something there? And that's 100% one of the big issues, especially like Bruce mentioned, if you've got a government department that have a Word version, they've exported it to PDF, they've clicked the button that says make there be tags, and they go, oh yeah, there's tags, therefore the document's accessible. I think whenever we get the question of should this document be in Word or in PDF, I think that it very much comes down to what you are expecting people to be able to do. So I certainly think that if you have a well-structured, well put together PDF that is relatively straightforward, or if the requirement for your document is designed in a way that necessitates it being in PDF. So a really simple one is, like, if it has to be in columns, because for whatever reason you refuse to not have it in columns, then it's, if there's nothing else to be done for it, then having that in PDF is always going to be a better option if for whatever reason the document breaks as soon as you put it into single columns. But I do think that the barrier to entry for PDF accessibility is significantly higher than the barrier to entry for learning how to create accessible Word documents. So the idea that they're easier to create and in some instances easier to read definitely puts Word as the go-to option if you're looking to provide something that's going to work for the most number of people in the most number of ways.
Can I just add one other thing? Is that one of the biggest one of the arguments that we hear most often from particularly government departments as to why documents must be provided in PDF and not in Word is this issue around security. You know, if we provide a Word document, then someone can get it and change it, and we don't want people to change it, so we'll password protect the PDF file, and often that means they put the wrong password on it, so the screen readers can't access it, even if it is tagged. And we always, you know, we always say that, look, all you need to do is to say, look, the Word, we're providing the definitive version in PDF, and you can tag it if you like, and hopefully you will. And we're also providing a Word version to facilitate accessibility, but the Word version should not be regarded as the definitive version. That's all you have to do, and 99% of the security issues will go away.
Thank you, Bruce. We had another question there around what is the most secure format to provide forms in. So I think that gives us the answer there as well. PDF is probably the most secure format, but you need to ensure that people can access that same information either in an accessible alternative, or at least that PDF is fully accessible as well. Thank you, guys. One here for, I'll send it to Bo and Matt. Has anyone on the panel dealt with data visualization tools and accessibility? A number of government agencies are now using Tableau, Power BI. We certainly know this, guys. In your experience, are agencies making visualizations accessible? If so, do you know how they're going about it?
Yeah, so I'll start with that one. So the best tool out there that we're aware of is HighCharts for data visualization, as they're pretty on the ball with making their charts actually readable with a screen reader compared to the other options. The other tools like Power BI, I know at least from Microsoft, has a VPAT, which is a basically a standard document stating what they have made accessible. And for the most part, they have done the best to make most things accessible in Power BI. But at the end of the day, it's not just what tool you use, it's also how you put together those data visualizations. So, you know, you still need to consider things like using color alone to identify, you know, red is this particular thing in the graph, and if you can't see red, then you're out of luck. So pretty much a catch-all for, you know, making sure that your data visualization is accessible and readable to just about everyone is to provide a table version along with that graph, so that you got your fancy pretty graph, and then you also under that graph or inside a expandable section or even just on another page, provide a table version, as long as you got a clear link to say, you know, see table version of graph. You go to another page, there's a HTML table there that has all the same content that is shown in the graph. Then at least if for whatever reason you cannot make out the content in the graph, you at least have that table version available. So that is probably one of the easiest ways to get around the issue and actually provide an accessible alternative for people. But if you do want to make your actual graphs accessible and actually readable with a screen reader, then HighCharts is a good one to use.
Thank you, Matt. Bo, anything to add?
I'd just add that with any third-party tools that you might get to help you achieve something like graphs and data visualization, some might claim they're accessible, and they may be, they may not be, but even if they are, there's always going to be things that you need to do. So they're going to provide you the tools you need to apply accessibility to whatever you're doing with that third-party plugin. So it's important to understand what those tools are, how to use them, but ultimately how to make content accessible in general, so that you can go in and use these tools and use their features to make it accessible. Because I don't think there's any third-party plugin or component library or anything that's going to be just automatically accessible, because it usually depends on the content that you're using and the information you're providing.
Yeah. It would be like if you bought a car with really good fuel efficiency, but then you never filled it up. It's pretty much like that.
It has a fuel tank.
It does. Look, and the ultimate test, obviously, is testing it with people with disabilities, with different adaptive strategies, and therefore, can they still get the information that they need from whatever tool it is that you're using or the alternative format that you're providing it in.
Actually, I'll just add one more thing. Sorry, Josh. A graph might be providing a nice way to see data and just data points, but often a graph will be communicating more information than that. So it's important to remember we're not just necessarily giving data as an alternative that's an adequate equivalent alternative format. So you want to make sure that if there's other information in a graph, that's been provided as a text alternative as well. Because often graphs are maybe showing a trend of some kind, or there's, like if it was flu cases over the last 5 years, and we see flu in Australia is way lower this year because no one's been outside, well, especially in Melbourne. I'm from Melbourne, so so yeah, just keep that in mind as well. It's not just give the people the data, because if your graph is actually showing more information than that, you want to provide that to people as well.
One of the challenges that many of us have had during the COVID pandemic is that a lot of the data that's been provided has been in the form of sort of data visualizations. Vision Australia has done some research where we've sort of asked feedback on people's experiences during COVID, and one of the areas where people provided significant feedback was we haven't been able to access key information because it's presented in visual form, and very little of that visual presentation has been accessible, certainly in my experience and the experience of people who provided sort of feedback to us. So I think things like data visualization and how you provide accessible versions that convey the same information that is provided by the data or the graph, I think is going to become a more significant issue as time goes on, because I don't imagine data visualizations will go away when the pandemic goes away.
I think not.
I'm just going to quickly add in as well, data literacy is quite low in Australia, as is in most countries. I think they estimate around 1/3 of the population can confidently read data. So that's one other thing to consider, and Bo's points around, summarizing what's in the chart and the text around it, things like that, to help people interpret the data is also really, really important.
Thank you, guys. Deb, do you want to give us another question that's come through? I know there's quite a few coming through at the moment. Do you want to read another one out, please?
Okay, this one's been sitting here for a while. Is Microsoft Teams as accessible as Zoom for workshops, webinars, etc.?
Open it up. Does anybody want to take that one?
Yes and no. Look, I'd say it's okay. Well, let's put it this way. Yes, it is accessible, but it's a lot more complicated than Zoom is, because Zoom is a video communication tool. Yes, you can do screen sharing and all that sort of cool stuff, but Microsoft Teams is what the name implies. It's a Teams platform for working, collaborating, deploying, accessing documents, videos, and other content. So what I'd say that is it's definitely not as fully accessible as Zoom. It's still accessible, but you have to know from a user's point of view on, number one, how to actually use the software, which is always important besides the Access technology, and then how to use your Access technology that may have various options to optimize the use of the Microsoft Teams platform. So if I was to plonk a Microsoft Teams window in front of somebody who didn't know how to use it, and I plonked Zoom in front of a similar person, I could guarantee that I could have that person up running with Zoom in about 5 or 10 minutes. I wouldn't get that type of usability out of Microsoft Teams because it is, Microsoft Teams, because it is so powerful.
Thank you, David. Look, we advise clients when this comes down to it, on occasions about Zoom being the preference for that reason and many others. But there is that big caveat that both of these technologies have already moved on, that we've all seen in the press or actually experienced in the last 8 months, especially. And looking at their kind of R&D pipelines going forwards, we can expect many changes from them in the near future as well. And it's good to see that accessibility on the whole is being built into them as well.
Microsoft Teams has improved this year in terms of its accessibility, but I completely agree with David. It does require a bigger learning curve. Once you've mastered it, it is very powerful. I mean, we use it at Vision Australia, and we'll probably increasingly use it. And I know in Australia many government departments are required to use it because Zoom was sort of late to kind of improve its security. And I would say that now, as opposed to the beginning of this year, I personally have more confidence in using Teams than I used to have. But if I had a choice, my sort of preference for webinars and things would still be Zoom, just because of that ease of use, and you don't have to think too much about it.
Thanks, Bruce. Question for you, Matt. Is there anything in HTML specs that forbids placing two headers, two footers as direct children of the same sectioning element?
I think what that question is asking is if you just have two headers or two footers right next to each other. In the HTML spec, not really that we could find. We did look through the HTML spec and see if we could find anything. I know that from accessibility standpoint, screen readers are just going to read heading landmark, or footer landmark. So we'll just read it out twice, which isn't ideal. So you want to try and avoid that when you can, putting two landmarks right next to each other that are of the same type.
Thanks. Anybody got anything to add to that at all?
I'm not sure that the HTML spec would want that to be used, because if you've got multiple things that could be headers or footers, they're probably supposed to be in the one header or footer and just separated with other elements. So I'd definitely be suggesting to only use one. And I think the question's more around like article elements and maybe section elements. I think in article elements, you can have header and footer. So I'm not sure how that reads for a screen reader. If it's in an article, maybe David or Bruce have some more advice on that. But yeah, I don't think just because it's not in the spec to say don't use multiple, I don't think they would want you to use multiple. I don't think it's meant to be like that.
Thanks, guys. Alex, this is someone's here just kind of explained one of the issues that they've had. One major challenge I've experienced this year was trying to make Letterhead accessible and consistent so that all the information is there when someone opens a letter template. The letter is written and the position of the static text and its format doesn't change when typing the contents of the letter. Have you got any advice that you can provide around that Alex? For making a letterhead accessible, consistent, and doesn't move around?
So I think ultimately it comes down to how you're trying to use it, because there's making the letterhead accessible in that when you provide the letter at the end, all that information's there. And then there's making the letterhead accessible in that the author of the content is able to open it and know all of that information before they start typing in. So if, for example, you were going to place all of that header information in a header or footer in Word before typing out the content, if you then export that letter to PDF for distribution, you can go into the PDF and make sure that all of that header information is read out as well as the content of the letter, and that's not going to impact on the layout of the content itself. But it's going to also depend on the layout of your header itself. So if you're planning on having a, if you want all your contact information on that letterhead that's all running down the left-hand side or all running down the right-hand side of the page, and it's not information just at the top, then you may need to look at either designing it in a way where it doesn't have to be interfering with the rest of the body text, or again, if you can, one of the key benefits, I guess, for that sort of thing, if you're going to be putting it in PDF, is that you can choose what information gets read out in what order. So if you want your letterhead to be read out first, but it happens to be halfway down the page or along the side of the page, you can do that a lot more easily than if you're wanting that information to be in an irregular spot in a Word template.
Thank you, Alex. Guys, we're nearly out of time. I just want to remind everyone that whoever registered today, they are in the chance of a lucky dip to get a free registration to the Document Accessibility Toolbar, the free toolbar for Microsoft Word on the website. 5 free registrations for the e-learning course that complements that. So those people which we picked after this and will be notified via email. But we got a chance at least for one more question. And Josh, I don't know how quick this is going to be, but your top 5 tips to optimize digital accessibility for someone who is new to the communications world in 2 minutes.
Yeah, it's a pretty hard one. In terms of like optimize, I wasn't sure in terms of optimizing the process or just some tips. But I would say practicing writing good text alternatives. And that could be for images. It could also be for charts or even videos, like practice describing how you describe visual things. Writing in plain language. It's a AAA WCAG requirement, but I think it's really, really important. I wish it was kind of AA. Providing captions and transcripts of video and audio. They can benefit lots of different disability demographics, and the wider community really appreciate them as well. So certainly recommend that. I think breaking up content into small pieces, using things like headings or lists, anything you can do, technical term for that's called chunking information, can help people memorize it better. It benefits everybody, but can particularly benefit some people with cognitive and learning disabilities, like ADHD, where maybe the short-term memory isn't as strong. They're probably my top 5 in terms of they're things that most of us can do. They don't require really specific tools or technology. Really, it just requires our skills and practice in terms of being able to do them. So yeah, hopefully that's within 2 minutes.
That was very good, very concise. Thank you, mate. Look, thank you everybody for attending today, and thank you very much to all of our panel for all of their advice. Apologies if we didn't get a chance to answer your question. We'll be carrying on the webinar series again next year in 2021. We've had some really good feedback. So please, subscribe to make sure that you're aware of that, along with our newsletters around training and other services. We've got some big changes coming up in the new year, which we'll be really happy to kind of share with you all as we go through it. But thank everybody again for attending today, and just wish you all a safe and happy holiday. Thanks very much, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.
Yeah, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.